My name is Lucy Edwards, and I was 28 years old when my father died. I remember standing at the edge of the cemetery that afternoon, watching people I barely knew gather around his casket. The sky was gray, not dramatically so, just the kind of flat, colorless gray that makes everything feel muted. I wore a black dress I'd bought the night before because I didn't own one. I hadn't expected to need it so soon. My father's family stood in a tight cluster near the front. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them speaking in low voices, exchanging tissues, holding each other's arms. I stood about 10 feet away. No one had asked me to join them. No one had looked for me when I arrived late. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was used to it. I was. My cousin Vanessa broke away from the group at some point. I didn't see her coming until she was right next to me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I was. She just stood there for a moment, arms crossed, looking out at the grave. Then she said it. "No one will come for you." Her voice was quiet, almost casual, like she was commenting on the weather. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She just turned and walked back to the others, her black coat swaying behind her. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I didn't cry. But something inside me folded. I stood there as people began to leave, one by one, until the cemetery was almost empty. I watched the family walk toward their cars together, still clustered, still whispering, and I wondered, for the first time in years, if Vanessa was right. I wasn't always standing on the edges, I just learned to stay there. My mother died when I was 7. After that, my father became someone I lived with but didn't really know. He worked long hours, came home tired, ate dinner in front of the television, and went to bed. We didn't talk much. I don't think he knew how to talk to a little girl who looked so much like the woman he'd lost. The extended family stepped in, but only in theory. My aunt hosted holiday dinners, and I was invited the way you invite someone out of obligation. I sat at the far end of the table. I was never asked what I wanted to eat. No one remembered my birthday unless I mentioned it first, and eventually I stopped mentioning it. Vanessa, on the other hand, was everywhere. She was my uncle's daughter, bold, charming, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became its center. She got the attention I never asked for. She got the pride I stopped expecting. When she graduated high school, the family threw her a party. When I graduated, my father handed me a card with $50 in it and told me he was proud. I learned not to need them. I learned to be quiet, to take care of myself, to stop waiting for invitations that wouldn't come. I built a life that didn't require their approval. I thought I'd made peace with it. But standing at my father's funeral, hearing Vanessa say those words, it wasn't new. It was just the same cruelty I'd felt my entire life, distilled into one sentence. No one will come for you. She wasn't being cruel in that moment. She was just saying what had always been true. Except something about that day felt different. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to be wrong. I was still standing near the grave when I heard the engines. 3 black cars pulled up along the cemetery road, moving slowly, deliberately. They weren't the kind of cars you see at funerals, not hearses, not family sedans. These were sleek, expensive, the kind that made you wonder who was inside. Everyone stopped. The family, halfway to their own cars, turned to look. The few remaining mourners paused mid-conversation. Even the cemetery workers glanced up from their equipment. The doors opened, and out stepped 5 people, 4 men, 1 woman, all of them dressed in sharp, dark suits. They moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a leather briefcase, led the group. They walked directly toward me. I didn't understand. I looked around, thinking maybe they were headed somewhere else, to another grave, another family. But the older man's eyes were locked on me. He knew exactly where he was going. When he reached me, he stopped. He didn't smile, but his expression was kind. "Lucy Edwards," he said. "Not miss, not ma'am. My name. I'm Richard Calloway. I was your father's attorney." He paused, glancing briefly at the small crowd still watching from a distance. "I need to speak with you privately. Is now a good time?" I couldn't find my voice at first. I just nodded. Behind him, I saw my family staring. My aunt's mouth was slightly open. My uncle had his hands in his pockets, frozen mid-step. And Vanessa's face had gone pale. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't moving. I turned back to Mr. Calloway. "What is this about?" I asked quietly. "Your father left specific instructions," he said. "There are things you need to know, things he wanted you to hear first." He gestured toward one of the cars, where the others stood waiting, professional, patient, there for me. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know what my father could have possibly left behind that required lawyers and private conversations. But I knew, standing there with all of them watching, that something had just shifted, and it changed everything. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't post anything online. I didn't send a message explaining myself. I just stopped responding. The first week after the funeral, I met with Mr. Calloway 3 times. He walked me through my father's business, a consulting firm he'd built quietly over 20 years, advising corporations on logistics and supply chain management. It was technical, complex, and incredibly successful. He'd kept it separate from his personal life entirely. The family didn't even know it existed. I sat in conference rooms with people who spoke about my father with respect, even admiration. I didn't recognize the man they described, but I listened, I learned, I asked questions. By the second week, I'd changed my phone number. I didn't tell anyone. The group chats went silent on my end, not because I muted them, but because they no longer reached me. I stopped checking the old email address my family used. I didn't block anyone. I just became unavailable. I found a new apartment across town. It was smaller than I needed, but it was mine. The lease was in my name. The address wasn't shared. I packed my things slowly, deliberately, taking only what mattered. I left behind anything that felt like weight. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was protecting myself. But to them, it felt like abandonment. Vanessa sent messages to my old number, long, angry paragraphs about family, about loyalty, about how I'd changed. She accused me of being cold. She said I was acting like I was better than everyone. She called me selfish. I never saw those messages in real time. I only found them later, weeks afterward, when I briefly logged into the old account out of curiosity. I read them once, calmly, then I deleted them. Other relatives tried too. My aunt left voicemails asking why I wasn't returning calls. My uncle sent an email saying we needed to talk, that the family was concerned. One cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years suddenly wanted to meet for coffee. I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of spite, not out of anger. I just didn't owe them access anymore. And that's when they started to panic. I learned about the money from Mr. Calloway during our 4th meeting. He slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were spreadsheets, bank statements, payment records going back years. My father had been quietly supporting half the family. Monthly payments to my aunt for rent, a loan to my uncle that was never repaid, just forgiven over and over. Thousands funneled into Vanessa's startup, a boutique marketing agency that never turned a profit. He never asked them to pay him back, Mr. Calloway said. He just kept the accounts open. Some of these have been running for over a decade. I stared at the numbers. My father, the man who barely spoke to me, had been bankrolling people who treated me like I didn't exist. "What happens now?" I asked. "That's up to you," he said. "You're the estate executor. You can continue the payments, renegotiate terms, or cease them entirely. Legally, you're not obligated to maintain any of this." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the names on the list. People who never called me, people who never asked how I was, people who stood in clusters at the funeral and didn't make room for me. "Cease them," I said quietly. Mr. Calloway nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Within 2 weeks, the consequences began to show. My aunt called my old number, panicked, asking why the rent payment hadn't come through. My uncle left a voicemail saying there must have been some mistake with the bank. Vanessa's business, which had been limping along on my father's monthly deposits, missed payroll. She had to let go of her only 2 employees. I didn't hear any of this from them directly. I heard it from Mr. Calloway, who fielded their calls when they realized they couldn't reach me. He informed me, professionally, that several family members were trying to contest the will. They wanted to argue that my father hadn't been of sound mind, that I had manipulated him. It went nowhere. The will was airtight. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything, really. I just watched from a distance as people who had spent years living beyond their means suddenly had to face what their lives actually cost. They didn't know I'd made the decision. They didn't know I even knew about the payments. They just knew the money had stopped and I wasn't answering. I didn't tell them. I didn't explain. I just let reality teach them what I'd learned a long time ago, that no one was coming to save you, that you had to save yourself. Vanessa showed up at my old apartment 6 weeks after the funeral. I know because the landlord called me. A woman had been knocking on the door for 20 minutes, demanding to know where I'd gone. When no one answered, she'd gone to the building manager, insisting it was a family emergency. The landlord told her I'd moved out weeks ago and didn't leave a forwarding address. I thanked him and hung up. 2 days later, an email arrived in my old inbox. The subject line was in all caps, "We need to talk." Inside, Vanessa had written 3 paragraphs about family, about respect, about how I was tearing everyone apart by disappearing. She demanded a meeting. She said I owed them an explanation. She ended with, "This isn't like you, Lucy Edwards." I read it once. I didn't reply. A week after that, she posted something on social media. It was vague but pointed, something about how grief changes people, how some family members abandon the ones who need them most, how silence is just another form of cruelty. A few relatives liked it. One commented with a heart emoji. I saw it because a former coworker sent me a screenshot asking if I was okay. I was. I didn't respond to the post. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that I hadn't abandoned anyone. I just stopped letting them ignore me. I didn't tell her that silence wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. The confrontation Vanessa wanted would have given her something, a role, a reaction, proof that I still cared what she thought. But I didn't, and without my participation, there was nothing to confront. She couldn't fight someone who wasn't fighting back. She couldn't guilt someone who had stopped listening. I went to work. I met with the business advisors. I learned my father's systems, his clients, his routines. I lived in my new apartment and felt, for the first time in years, like I could breathe. I realized something important during those weeks. I didn't owe them my pain. I didn't owe them my time. I didn't owe them my presence. I didn't owe them anything at all. 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room in Denver, reviewing a contract for a new client. Mr. Calloway sat across from me, along with 2 senior consultants who had worked with my father for years. They treated me like a colleague, not a grieving daughter playing pretend. They asked my opinion. They listened when I spoke. When I made a decision, they followed it. I'd stepped into my father's business gradually, carefully. I didn't pretend to know everything. I asked questions. I studied. I traveled to meet clients in person. Chicago, Seattle, Atlanta. I learned the work, and slowly, I became good at it. I started therapy around the same time. Once a week, I sat in a small office with soft lighting and talked about my father, about the family, about the loneliness I'd carried for so long I'd stopped noticing it. My therapist didn't tell me to forgive anyone. She just helped me see that I'd been waiting my entire life for people to notice me, and that I didn't have to wait anymore.
I wasn't happy in the way people expect. I didn't wake up every day feeling triumphant, but I was steady. I was building something. I had people around me who saw me as capable, as worthy of respect, not because of my last name, but because of the work I did. Sometimes I still thought about the funeral, about standing alone while everyone else gathered together, about Vanessa's words, "No one will come for you." She was wrong. People had come, they just weren't the ones she expected. They were the lawyers, the business partners, the clients who respected my father and now respected me. They were the version of family I'd built for myself. I didn't hate Vanessa. I didn't hate any of them. I just didn't need them anymore. People ask me sometimes if I ever regret what happened, if I wish things had gone differently with my family. I don't. This was never a revenge story. I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I didn't scheme or plot or plan their downfall. I just stopped participating in a dynamic that had been hurting me for years. I set boundaries. I protected myself. And if that felt like punishment to them, that says more about what they expected from me than anything I actually did. My father's inheritance was complicated. It validated me in a way I didn't know I needed. It gave me proof that someone had seen me, even if he'd never said it out loud. But it didn't erase the loneliness. It didn't heal the little girl who sat at the end of the table, waiting to be noticed. I'm still working through that. Probably will be for a while. But I also know this. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not waiting for my family to apologize. I'm not waiting for Vanessa to understand. I'm not waiting for anyone to see my worth, because I've stopped letting other people define it. I stood in my apartment last week, looking out over the city. The lights stretched out in every direction, calm and endless. I was holding my father's letter, the one Mr. Calloway gave me at the funeral. I used to read it constantly, searching for answers, for closure. Now I keep it in a drawer. I know what it says. I don't need to keep proving it to myself.
I thought about the funeral, about standing alone in the cold, about Vanessa's voice, quiet and certain. No one will come for you. She was wrong. People did come, just not the people she expected. And more importantly, I came for myself. I showed up for my own life. I built something new. I stopped waiting to be chosen and chose myself instead. That's not revenge. That's survival. And I'm still here.